Welcome, everybody. My name is Brooke Hevright, and I'm the director of the Criminal Investigation and Network Analysis Center, a DHS Center of Excellence here at George Mason. We're pleased that you can join us for this event today, sponsored jointly by my organization, CINA, and our colleagues at The Noble, a nonprofit based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which brings together financial service professionals, law enforcement, regulators, and NGOs to lead and innovate more effective ways to fight human crime. Our speaker today is Donna Turner, a member of the Noble Board and a former Bank of America C-suite executive. Her talk is titled The Global Squeezing of the Fraud Balloon. First, I'd like to thank Noble founder and board chair Ian Mitchell and executive director Dave Warland and their team members Emma Thompson and Rose McQuilty for identifying Donna as a potential speaker and all their help to make Donna's talk today a success. Next, I'd like to recognize and thank CINA's program management team at the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate, Office of University Programs, Corey Davenport and Sue Newman, for their support for this talk and for the rest of CINA's Distinguished Speaker Series. Now, before we start, a few words about CINA. CINA's mandate is to advance DHS and the US government's mission to counter transnational organized crime. DHS Centers of Excellence are managed by the DHS Science and Technology Directorate's Office of University Programs, and they're each led by a university to conduct groundbreaking research resulting in rigorous, objective knowledge products and timely solutions for DHS components. Today's talk by Donna Turner will touch on several of CINA's research themes. These include criminal network analysis, dynamic patterns of criminal activity, forensics, both traditional and cyber, and criminal investigative processes. CINA is supported by a DHS board of directors who help us to ensure the relevance of our research and identify champions and funding for transition. If you're excited by what you hear today and you think that CINA research can help your component's mission, please put your email in the chat, respond to our follow-up survey, or visit our website at cina.gmu.edu to join our mailing list. We're happy to set up capability briefs with DHS and other US government stakeholders to identify champions for eventual knowledge and technology transition. Our talk today, in partnership with the Noble, grows out of a workshop that CINA and the Noble hosted jointly this spring, April 29th through 30th, on countering cyber-enabled human crime. That conference brought academia and industry together with close participation by HSI and other US government agencies to chart pathways to tackle some of the most pressing issues in human crime. That's part of why we decided to share between CINA and Noble our expertise and our audiences today. And we're looking forward to more joint events and initiatives like this one. So now it's my pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker, Donna Turner. Donna is an industry thought leader in payments, product management, fraud risk management, and operations. She earned her undergraduate degree at the University of Florida and subsequently earned certifications in operational management from the University of Michigan and risk management from Harvard University. Donna then built a 30-year career in financial services with PNC and Bank of America. Her experiences in banking spanned large-scale global operations, product and P&L management, risk management, process engineering, and enterprise fraud risk management. Donna then served as Chief Operations Officer for Early Warning Systems, the industry consortium behind a payments network that we have all come to know. And Donna helped to bring this network to life. Her current venture is Risk Insight Solutions, an advisory firm aimed at assisting companies in developing sustainable growth, addressing risk, and delivering exceptional experiences. Donna has been recognized as one of the most influential women in payments and holds 2 patents in the fraud risk management area. She served as chair of the board for the Ada Jenkins Center and is currently, as I mentioned, on the board of directors for the Noble. And in that capacity, I understand she'll take a few minutes at the start of her talk to introduce the Noble and its work. But now, please join me in welcoming Donna Turner with her talk, The Global Squeezing of the Fraud Balloon.
Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here. As Brooke said, I'm a retired banker, typical banking career, right? You move around a lot, so you begin to understand how to connect the dots. I was very privileged to spend the last 10 years of my career at Bank of America helping to build out and then ultimately lead our enterprise fraud center of excellence. And then taking that and really opting and enjoying working at the industry level with early warning services to help with the build out, ultimately the launch and operationalizing the Zelle P2P network, as well as all the legacy solutions that early warning is always created as part of that bank consortium for financial services. Let me go ahead and share some content that I'll be going through with you today. As Brooke said, the first thing that I'd like to do is talk about the Noble and give you a quick background on the Noble, and kind of hopefully you'll see the connected tissue here as we walk through the discussion. The Noble came about as a way to bring awareness to the fight of human crimes to the financial services community. I think you're all keenly aware that financial services has an incredible power to process, analyze, and action extremely large troves of data. If we could take that fundamental strength, that core capability, and marry it up with an awareness of human crimes, bring the power of that capability to financial services, enabling and asking them to identify and ultimately aid in the fight to stop human crime. That's really at the heart of this. We do this through the learning motion. We create and share insights across sectors, across financial institutions, working side by side with law enforcement and some of the initiatives. And then those same insights that are gained are spread and adopted more rapidly. So you really kind of have this grassroots, this greenfield effect that begins to take effect across financial services and law enforcement. The environment that's been created creates a safe, very controlled, very well vetted forum for networking, learning, and taking action in this fight against human crimes. So you see there, really that's our core mission. That's really how we approach it. Let's talk about human crime though. And I know with this audience, there's probably not much new here. But again, let me connect those dots for you around human trafficking. Again, if we can take the tools and the disciplines, the mindset that are inherent in fraud and AML risk organizations across financial services, and we can tie those same capabilities in that transactional monitoring to trafficking, you leverage the existing processes with FinCEN to alert and share the details of the suspected activity. Really, it's just about awareness, learning, and application of tools, capabilities, and expertise that already exist. Scams, we get this a lot. What's the connection? Why are you guys focused on scams? The reality is, and we're going to talk a lot more about this over the next hour, the success rate of scams has created an insane demand for human labor. Something that was news to me, I'll share with you, 80% of trafficked humans are tied to labor rather than sex trades. Many of you know, but I continue to try and pound the table around awareness that there are extremely large camps of enslaved labor that have existed in Southeast Asia. We're now seeing it spread to India, Mexico, et cetera, because of the success of these scams, the financial opportunity they represent. Therefore, the risk to humans around the globe to be trafficked slave labor is increasing exponentially along with that. Child sexual exploitation, money movement. The exchange of funds for goods and services, very similar to trafficking, by creating an awareness, by sharing practices, by working side by side with law enforcement, we're able to identify and help law enforcement action and take down child sexual exploitation. I know for me, when I was still with early warning services and, we're scaling up and growing and working on sustaining the Zelle network, is when I became involved with the Noble. And in a conversation with Stuart Davies, who was with a bank in Canada, we learned about a hypothesis that they had, identifying in P2P payments, activities around child sexual exploitation. I'll confess to an insane level of naivety on this point. Was on the phone with Stuart and I said, hey, talk to me. What should I be looking at? Because I knew while they had different rails, fundamentally P2P, is not an incredibly rich data set to work with. And he talked to me about something as simple as the memo line. You all would be amazed. Perhaps this audience would not be amazed what people are willing to put in a memo line. I learned the word lollipop is code word heavily used around child sexual exploitation. We wrote some simple rules to identify that in memo lines, referred that back to the financial institutions that were domiciling those accounts and asked them to go deeper and take actions as necessary with FinCEN to report to law enforcement. So something as simple as that. we were able to generate more insights for our partners in law enforcement to take action. We've done an effort for, I believe, 3 years now around the Super Bowl. I think many of you are aware when there's very large scale events, sporting events, et cetera, the level of trafficked labor, the child sexual exploitation, all this just comes to the city along with this. So what we've been able to do over the years is grow the number of financial institutions that literally sit side by side with law enforcement. In this example, during the Super Bowl, looking for patterns of money movement, taking insights from law enforcement, taking what they know about the humans involved, the money movement involved, and just doing some extremely rapid fire identification and enrichment for law enforcement. This past Super Bowl, I believe the data point was we were able to rescue 6 kids. Law enforcement was able to rescue 6 kids. A number of suspects identified, a number of ongoing cases just simply enriched with more data. It just speaks to the power of this collaboration that the Noble's trying to drive forward. Similar efforts have happened around the US Open, Formula One events, and we're hoping to continue to grow and globalize those efforts. Elder exploitation is really kind of a new vertical for us. But what we realized is we got deeper and deeper into scams. There's no demographic that's immune to a scam. Don't let people tell you that this is just about old people falling victim. I can truly tell you that there is no demographic that is immune to falling for scams. What we know is that the nuances of protecting and detecting with older citizens is unique, and that's why we carved out that particular vertical recently and are working to understand how we can deepen and be more effective with this approach. So having said that, again, when we talk about following the money, right? We talk about, you'll often hear us say in fraud risk management, in financial crimes risk management, you prevent it, you detect it, it's going to happen. So you work to resolve or remediate it, and then you analyze the hell out of it. What we do here really isn't all that different, right? There's a heavy focus on prevention, education, policy, right? This is something you wouldn't necessarily hear a financial crimes expert talk about within an industry, except within their 4 walls. But we recognize that at the Noble, sometimes you need policy changes in order to enable the fight. Something that came out of that forum that Brooke talked about in the spring was conversations around SARS, suspicious activity reports, and what improvements law enforcement would love to see around the SARS and the way that financial institutions were filling them out. Greater use of headlines, less narrative, more data, okay? Well, in order to it all sounds simple enough, but we're gonna have to go back and change policy in order to be able to do that, to keep the regulators aligned with FinCEN, to keep aligned with the various agencies of law enforcement, and to be able to make this happen across financial services. Detection reporting, I hit on that, right? This is at the core of what financial services does, but we need to recognize that we're not going to win the fight alone. So working with the hospitality industry, I think you all, as you live in your communities, can't fly in an airline or be in an airport where there's not warning signs or call to action. Do you need help, right? Hospitality industry is doing some great things along the same vein. You see trucks rolling down the highway with 800 numbers on them, right? It really is going to take the entire ecosystem to win this battle. And of course, you've heard very consistently through this that we are here to enable ultimately law enforcement to really be most effective to eradicate this crime. There are some things happening around recovery and restoration that I'd like to call out. The Noble is a not-for-profit, but there's a company that was started within the last few years, Mission Omega. It's a very boutique consulting and staffing firm focused on the fraud and AML sector. But they take a portion of their profits, and it's a really key funding source. For the Noble, what they also do is take victims of trafficking and working with the other agencies that are working to reintegrate them into society, offer them a career path, offer them a way to earn a living, and do it in a safe environment where people understand what they've been through and they understand the distinct needs of that employee population. So, hey, follow the money, right? We all live this. It's really at the heart of what we do, and it's at the heart of how we do it. Um, so, all sounds great here, right? So, are you guys making any dents? So, this is kind of where we're at today. There's 7,000 ish professionals in the Noble Network. Everyone's vetted before you're allowed to become a member. We have very large attendance on our webinars, this sharing of best practices, the sharing of insights, again, trying to get more folks to take action. And you see that we've been able to have 24 cross-industry initiatives. We know that this is the type of the iceberg. We know that we're young and we're trying to make things happen every day. But this is really how it all works. I mentioned we're only 5 years old. Leading initiatives right now. I am working along with Bob Shiflett on a sex extortion task force. This is something that also came out of the joint symposium this spring, where law enforcement was very passionate that this was an underserved scam, human crime. And I'll confess that I didn't really know much about it. But what we've done is on this task force, we have law enforcement, we have financial services, we have telcos, we have social media, we have academia, all coming together. We're going through a process to understand the stages of the crime and then work through for each stage of the crime, what can be done to prevent it, who's in the best position to prevent it, what can be done to detect it, similarly, who's in the best position to detect it, what is needed to remediate this. And our lens here tends to be on the victim, on law enforcement. What does law enforcement need to know and when to best serve them to stop this heinous crime? Around sharing insights, the Noble has a portal. Again, to be a member of the portal, you have to be vetted. So you can imagine this is all locked down. All these insights that we have, I mentioned we put on webinars, we publish thoughts. The Noble is made up of an incredible membership of expertise. I know from a banking perspective, right, leading some of these efforts, you have myself, right, I was a career banker, worked in a industry bank consortium. You have Bob Shiflett, who is probably the preeminent fraud leader in the industry. Stuart Davis out of Canada, one of the preeminent global AML experts. Terry Shepard, who I had the privilege of working with for many years at Bank of America, adds his financial expertise, and quite frankly, he leads our efforts around child sexual exploitation. I couldn't do what Terry does. It just, it makes me cry. There you have it. So you see that we're growing, right? We're growing not only in members and followership, but we're spreading our geography. A quick view of our board members. Of course, I'm privileged to be here today. Ian's the founder for the Noble. I've known Ian for many, many years. Ian became aware of human crime. He saw the connection to financial services, and he saw what was possible, and he took action 5 years ago and founded the Noble. You may know David and Frank. They build solutions that enable the fight. Who better to have at the table to really bring what's going on back to the capability sector to build new and enhanced. Matt Friedman, we're privileged to have. He brings his global expertise and passion and insights to us from Hong Kong. You've got Mary Ann, Sean, Ben. They're deeply embedded in the financial services communities through their firms. Again, this ability to draw on all these different aspects of strengths and capabilities and bring them to the table. And I mentioned that Richard, Terry, and myself, well, we all speak fluent banker, for whatever that's worth. Let's talk about the global squeezing of the fraud balloon. Now, human crime, right, we talked about this, is about money. Fraud generates money. You need labor, you need content, you need victims to have a successful fraud run. So it's an ugly intersection between these two crimes. I've had the privilege to work in this space for a couple of decades now, focusing on this intersection, but also understanding and having to execute against the delicate balance between the financial impact of the crimes and how this impacts an organization in the form of the losses, the cost of managing the risk, and guarding against unintended and undue impacts to good people, undue friction. So what I've learned from all this, what have I learned from the decades? That fraud can be isolated, but it's largely dominated by global organizations that seize and prey on opportunities where there have been changes to operating environments, people, process, or tech, and are able to quickly react and deploy to monetize shortcomings or gaps in the same. For many years, I simply had to accept that the bad guys were better funded and better staffed than I was. Not whining, you just have to know your reality and deal with it. So when we talk about kind of how we manage fraud risk here in the States and in North America largely, I want to first kind of take you back to some global examples because I do believe that we can learn from them. And unfortunately, my so what today is I believe we're not learning from them and we're living through it again. So let me first kind of take you back to 07 and 08. And I was asked a question at the time. You guys remember this economic cycle, you remember the chaos. And I got a question at the time that was very interesting. Is fraud like credit risk tied to the economic cycle? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Now, getting the data to answer this was challenging. As you know, we'd come off a couple decades of very rapid fire bank consolidations. Visa, MasterCard, American Express had their own fair share of acquisitions and consolidation. So I won't tell you that the data was pristine or perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we did get comfortable enough with it. And we're able to go back far enough in time that we came back with the answer that no, the fraud attack rate was pretty constant regardless of economic cycle. So then that begged the question for us, well, what the hell is tied to this? What is the driver? So as I looked at this over the years, I think it really comes back to variables that we could tie to material and sustained attacks. Yeah, there's always going to be one-offs. Put those aside. Let's talk about that constant fraud attack rate. And this also, by the way, applies to third-party fraud, so you don't know who's doing it. First-party fraud, we'll talk more about that later, or scams, where unfortunately the human becomes an unwilling participant. And I really always talk about this is the playbook. So there has to be a supply, and by supply, I mean there has to be a supply of gaps. There has to be a supply of change. So there's a gap to be actioned. You know, examples over the decades: weak controls on stored card data, perceptions of victimless crimes. Right? When we talk about first-party crime, you might have all seen recently. I believe it started on TikTok, but I don't want to necessarily blame them. That Chase had a glitch if you made an ATM deposit, because that was perceived to be a gap in an operational control. It was not, by the way. But this perceived, and oh, it's Chase, it's a victimless crime. I'm just going to make money against this big institution. I'm going to buy that TV from Target and then claim it was fraud. It's a victimless crime, right? Or human psyches, right? So, and we'll talk a lot more about that when we go much deeper on scams. So there has to be demand, right? Clearly, there was a market and a demand for the output of supply. Think about all those treasure troves of card data that was compromised. Think about identity breaches, contact information, right? Yes, and so there was a demand. Why was there a demand? Because there was value to be derived out of this. You have to be able to operate in a way that you can acquire and redistribute or directly action the gap along with the inventory, the data, in a way that produces meaningful margins, right? And meaningful margins are important. This is organized crime. A lot of what we do is about impacting the economics. Where we're trying to evolve to is to do that and have a much faster, stronger, deeper, direct relationship with law enforcement that we can not only impact the economics, but ultimately see folks out of business. I've said it and I'll say it time and time again. This is organized crime. We are not up against the random teenager with the keyboard. Yes, they are out there. This is organized crime. By understanding their economics is when we have the best hope of beating back an orchestrated fraud attack. I will also tell you this transcends geographical boundaries. They operate globally. We largely do not. Again, we're going to spend some time talking about that. The big learning and what we're going to emphasize today is you have to consider those global risks. You have to consider the global variables. You have to consider the actions being taken around the globe as they unfold. And as you, in whatever geography you're operating in, you derive and execute your plan of counterattack. So that's the playbook. We now know that it's not tied to economic cycles. We now know that there's kind of a pretty constant level of fraud attack. And we now know how they think about it and how all the variables come together. So let me take you through a case study. Prior to 2004, right, the UK had developed and implemented chip and pen technology. I believe it was 2003, if I remember correctly. And that came out of a need, right? You did not have a telephony infrastructure that really enabled real-time point-of-sale decisioning. So the need for the chip was to be able to store in an offline environment things like your credit line, maybe some velocity controls, your available credit, et cetera, in a way that if the point of sale terminal was not able to go online, again, there was a gap on real-time telephony capability, you could still decision, you could still make the purchase experience better for legitimate users. And the PIN was just simply to verify that you, the intended cardholder, was in possession of that. Yes, we watched it here domestically, but we didn't have the same gap on telephony capability. So it really wasn't something that domestically we were ever really pushing to do. We were humming along pretty well in the card space until 2011. Coming out of 07, 08, we weren't materially worse for the wear on fraud rates. There was new tech that was helping us to sustain or improve our detection capability. We were actually getting more efficient. We were actually doing a great job with reducing the friction on legitimate cardholders. Yes, we knew that the acquisition of stolen card data was rampant. But we had invested in people, process, and tech. We had insane capabilities around modeling and identifying long before a network would tell us that we believe we had compromised card data out there. And again, operating on the economics of balancing undue friction for cardholders and managing the risk for the bank. And then we had invested in tech where we knew the mag stripe was still a point of risk. We invested a great deal for Bank of America, right? 17,000 ATMs. We invested in anti-skimming devices at all our ATMs. And this really had us focusing more on leapfrogging to contactless as the next cardholder experience, as our version of adopting EMV standards here in the US. Along came 2011. Visa, MasterCard announced that they weren't going to wait for us to go to contactless. A tremendous amount of pressure from around the globe where their card data was still being skimmed or leveraged here domestically. And because of the operating rules at the time, they were taking the financial losses on that balance between good and bad. They were struggling. So Visa and MasterCard said, hey, US, you have got to go to full EMV standards. And you've got a deadline of, I believe it was October of 2015 to do so. What was it, right? So we knew, again, learning globally, understanding following actions in other parts of the globe, understanding what happened, applying them to your counterattack. We knew that we were going to see an increase in attack rates on payment cards, right? You've got this large supply of card data, PII that's out there. You have a desire to monetize it, to derive value out of that. And you had a shrinking window under which to do that at physical point of sales. So we knew from other geographies, we knew we were going to see a ramp up in attack rate. It's what we expected. That's what we planned for. What we saw was an attack rate that was exponentially greater than what had been observed in other geographies around the globe. as they moved to EMV standards in the payment card sector. Why? Because we were the last geography. The balloon of opportunity was shrinking. The geography of opportunity was shrinking. It's not going to go away, and we'll talk about that. So we went through exponentially greater attack rates. Now this becomes a function of pull-through math, right? You have your attack rate plus what you're multiplied by what you're able to prevent, multiplied by what you're able to detect, multiplied by what you're able to recover. So we're able to isolate each of those, and we were able to say, listen, this wasn't a change in downstream capabilities around prevention, detection, or recovery efforts. This was nothing more than a greater attack rate, and we were a victim of pull-through math. And we already knew what the impact was going to be with going to chips at point of sale. We just needed to get there. So again, think about that playbook we talked about. There was still strong demand for this card data. There was still value, but there was a shrinking time frame in which to monetize that at physical point of sale. We lived through it, right? It was not fun at all, but we lived through it. And then, so we had a change to the operating environment, right? Physical point of sale terminals changed, the cards turn, you change, right? You now had chip on chip verified transactions. So counterfeit cards, counterfeit mag stripe, right? Key entered, all those capabilities, that operating environment for the bad guys went away. However, you still had large stores of card data. You still had more card data being compromised every day. So there was still value to be had there. And you've seen this squeezing of the balloon. They didn't go get real jobs. You saw this squeezing of the balloon over to card not present. And we can talk more about that. But this is really our case study to tell us a few things, right? Bad guys operated globally. We needed to, while we didn't operate necessarily globally, we needed to have a global lens to understand fraud, prepare, and fight back. And again, at the end of the day, even when we put chips on cards, they didn't go get real jobs. We had to know and prepare for what was next. So let's talk about how the playbook's being used today. We've seen a resurgence of card fraud, right? There are no silver bullets in this business. Chips were not silver bullets. We've seen as we've gotten more effective on other fraud types. Again, you still have this trove of data and PII out there. There are still ways to monetize that. So they've kind of returned to some of those tried and true ways. I will tell you that this is further driven both by the first party abuse or the economic model. I think if you've studied insider fraud or first party abuse at all, you know that it's when opportunity meets rationalization. And I spoke to this a little bit earlier, right? These are victimless crimes. Target's not going to miss this money. The bank's not going to miss this money. Or you may see different attack vectors hit when we do have certain economic cycles. Well, I've told you, and I maintain that the attack rate is pretty constant. How they engineer attacks and what they focus on is very much tied to economic models. You'll see more things around mystery shopping opportunities, advance fee scams, et cetera, during more difficult economic times as an easy way to make money, as a way to gain employment. So we are seeing, given this economic cycle, we are seeing a resurgence in that front. The interesting thing is we've seen a resurgence in check and deposit fraud. This is something we were battling, 15 years ago. And really was the genesis of early warning systems in that bank consortium. By sharing data, right? Fundamental rule, beat me once, shame on you, beat me twice, shame on me. We were able to put together some tremendous capabilities around deposit fraud. However, think about this, for how many decades now have we talked about checks were going away, right? So operating environment, we didn't invest a lot in check controls. So operating environment, throw millions of stimulus checks into circulation, and eureka, there becomes a renewed interest and awareness around check fraud that continues today. Another element, of course, of our operating environment is the introduction of AI. I saw a data point recently that there's been a 4,000% increase in phishing since the introduction of Chat GPT. I want to tell you that even given all this, it is absolutely dwarfed by the resurgence of scams. And this is when the true party is involved. So you don't have an anonymous third party taking action for monetary gain. They actually engage directly with the consumer or the business to gain access to funds directly sent to them or otherwise. You put this all together, right? You have AI now, voila. You no longer have poorly constructed, grammatically incorrect phishing attacks or communications of any manner. Increased success rates are enabled, the economics improved because, oh, by the way, they've identified this cheap labor source, enslaved labor, the attacks increase, and we see the takeoff in scams. So let's talk about scams. Yeah, right, you can't live a day and not hear about scams. So in a nutshell, what the hell is going on? These aren't new, right? I hope you all remember your Nigerian uncle. I hope none of you sent that money to pay for the taxes so that they could send you your inheritance. But there's absolutely nothing new. Deposit, check scams, et cetera, advanced fee scams, shop from home, mystery shopping, overpayment, all this, none of this is new. However, what is new is these types of scams that I want to take you through, but I realize I just kind of glossed over the impact. It's estimated 137 billion was lost to scams in 2022. I will tell you that depending on who you talk to that's deeply embedded in this fight, they believe that it's only somewhere between 3% on the low side and maybe upwards of 30% are actually reported. This is an insane impact on generational wealth. The suicide rates for people that are victimized of scams are 10x the rest of the population. The mental health toll is extreme. And there's going to be continued broad economic impacts from this transfer of liquidity. We have got to get on top of this. So let's talk more about kind of the top five and how they're working today. And I think about this in terms of dollar impact, not number. Investment scams, right? Fear of missing out on a high return. People getting rich overnight from Bitcoin. I don't want to miss out on that, right? I've seen this. I've read about this. I have a fear of missing out. Imposter scams. Again, I can only assume as consumers, you've all experienced this, right? The random text or phone call purporting to be from your bank, to be from law enforcement, to be from the IRS, to be from your utility firm. And if you don't take immediate action, there'll be dire consequences. This is how we think about imposter scams. Okay, so it's a fear of this undesirable consequence. Romance scams. We went through COVID, right? We went through a period of isolation. And so fear of missing out on companionship, right? I don't want to be lonely. And of course, goods, services, price, again, I'll point you an example top ahead during COVID. Suddenly that Labradoodle that had a 5-year waiting list was the cute little puppies available. PPE, toilet paper, you name it, right? So you create a fear of scarcity. And all of a sudden, you have adoption and you have victims for these scams. And I will caught in sextortion. Really focused on teens, really focused on not limited to, but focused on teen boys. And it's all predicated on a fear of public shaming. A young individual believes that they are talking to a peer, same age group, same demographic. They share explicit information, photos. That's then held against them and told if they do not pay up or share additional illicit material, they will go public. They will be humiliated publicly. Their families will be shamed, etc. And again, an unbearable level of suicide rates in this population, and that's why we have the current focus on that. So, hey, Don, if you said these have been around forever and they're still going on, and here's kind of your top five, what's changed? Um, well, they've just gotten better at this, right? If you think about investment scams, I've talked to victims, fully developed marketing materials, mailers, websites, testimonials. Um, you've heard or experienced AI targeted at businesses. We've all seen the cases where AI was used to create the voice and likeness of a CEO directing their CFO to wire millions of monies. There's nothing new about business compromises. It's just taking these new capabilities that enable the success rate, improve the economics, and therefore adoption spirals, right? So that type of AI generated imagery and communications, right? I talked about the fact that you can no longer do the bless your heart when you look at an email communication because it's got poor grammar, poor construct, text, whatever. It's just no longer the case anymore, right? We've talked about the resource and technological investments, right? You've got cheap labor, slave labor, that is behind this. These folks are enticed. They believe that maybe they're getting a job as an HR rep, maybe a UX designer, and they're offered this well-paying job. And again, if you think about some of the scenarios in Southeast Asia, they're not only going to be able to make enough money to support themselves, they're going to be able to send money home and help themselves. They're flown to the job destination. They're probably put up in a nice hotel. The first night, they're like, "Wow, this is incredible. My life's about to change." The next day, they're in a van. They're in a slave labor camp, and if you've ever seen the images, they basically look like military/prison compounds with barracks, barbed wire fencing, etc. These folks are threatened with their lives, beating. They're told their families will be killed if they do not meet certain performance objectives. So this is the tie between what we're doing at the Noble and what's going on with the fraud attacks across the globe today. And I'll add one new variable, and this at least for me is new, and it's the ideological genesis. When you look at the Yahoo boys and really kind of seen as, I guess, in my view, one of the founders and most prolific around the sextortion scams, they're willing to share their playbook. They're willing to share their how-to guides, et cetera, all for free. Because they believe that harming Westerners is really a greater victory than the financial gain out of this. And unfortunately, this has created a new evolution around sextortion where it's not necessarily as much about explicit images and financial gain. It's simply motivating these young people to do personal harm. You will hear me time and time again ask you, just do something, get involved, just do something, whether it's in the course of your professional role, whether it's you as an individual, talking to families, your communities, your churches, I don't care, just do something. Are they at the root cause of this? And the answer is simply no. I know there's been a lot of congressional hearings. I'm not faulting that around the issue. I wish they would focus more on the root cause of scams and fraud rather than arguing over who's liable. I'm not going to listen. I know economics matter, but we really need to be upstream and we really need to be understanding the big picture of this, and quit talking about who's liable and focus on how this is happening and how to stop it. Sorry, that was a bit of a soapbox tangent. But why did we see this surge with real-time payments? A lot of it's just the perfect storm. What you have here was a lot of new rails, a lot of new ways to move money. New rails means that the controls have not yet been hardened or stress test, right? You just don't know what you don't know about what your gaps. If you were, you would have closed them, right? You just simply don't know what you don't know about gaps when you go live with a new rail. And so again, changing an operating environment, remember the playbook. So they're preying on this just as they always have. This is not new. We saw this with the advent of digital wires. We saw this with remote deposit capture. We saw it with instant issue cards, right? Nothing new about this. These are new rails. We know the vulnerabilities. You couple this, however, with the speed. And so what you now have is new rails, right, that have not been hardened in stress test, and a payment form factor or payment discipline now, where we have abbreviated the financial institution's time frame for reviewing, contacting customers, et cetera, before they review that. You also even no longer have the ability to recall funds on that customer's behalf when it happens. So that was a change in operating environment. Because of that absence in recall, were these rails appealing? Because they hadn't been hardened, they hadn't been stress tested when you couldn't recall funds. So were they popular in the organized crime community? 100%. And I will tell you, while there's no silver bullet, I tell you that there is a key lesson learned here for anyone that's listening from financial services today. Do not open up real-time payments until you have real-time people, process, and tech. You will lose the battle. When we were launching Zelle, I assumed as a career banker and a fraud geek, right, that you just simply knew you were going to need to have a real-time fraud detection system if you were going to enable Zelle for your financial institution. I was wrong. We very quickly learned that we actually had to make it a rule. You could not go live on the network until you had real-time fraud capabilities, until you could prove to us that you were not only technologically ready, but you had the people and process to be ready as well. But all that unto itself is, again, not the silver bullet to how you devalue that. So if it's not real-time payments, again, what the hell is going on? So let's talk about the operating environment. A few quick tidbits for you, right? 1 in 7 profiles on a dating site are assumed to be fictitious. 20% of digital advertising is attributed to fraud, to scams, right? It's not real. Where am I going to continue to get victims from? Where am I going to continue to get data from? Hey, look at the state, 330 million people, $118 billion. Actually, I think that's supposed to be trillion in investable assets. Average credit line in the US is $22,000. In the first half of this year alone, over 1 billion consumers were impacted by data breaches, right? So the US is a geography, an incredibly great way to generate, and we are creating that demand for attack. So you take all this, right? How do I derive value? Well, I've got this opportunity. I've now got slave labor, so my costs have come down. I've got new technological capabilities. All this means a greater success rate. All this means that the attack rates in the US are going to continue to rise. All right, are we doing nothing? So let's talk about, and again, this is bring it back to the globalization, the global squeezing of the balloon, right? We talked about chip and pin. We talked about that EMV case study. We talked about the need to know what was going on globally to better predict and act to what was going to happen here domestically. Okay, so what is going on in other geographies around the globe? What we are starting to see is orchestrated efforts across sectors. Yes, mostly mandated, but forcing people or bringing people to the table across sectors: telecom, tech, social media, financial institutions, regulators, law enforcement. Right? It's gonna take the whole ecosystem. So we are seeing this in other geographies. We're seeing collaboration on tools and protocols across sectors. Right? Who knows what, when? Who's in the best position to take action to beat this back? It's not finger pointing. It's not about liability. Who's in the best position to know what, when to take action? That's what collaboration is about. The sharing of data, single repositories, not only understand the magnitude of the problem, quickly identifying emerging trends and attack vectors, but also speed the evolution of new capabilities and tools in the marketplace. And as you can see here, it's having a positive impact. We all follow the UK closely, right? The PSR, they've been at this the longest. Plagiarism is the highest form of flattery. Brooke's probably not going to agree with that, by the way. and we've been watching, right? So you get into the whole, hey, do I need to be first to market or I need to be a fast follower? I won't tell you that that's a driving mindset here. I'm just telling you, we are learning to watch very closely what is going on in other geographies. Brazil had this incredible adoption in uptake around PIX. With that came an incredible increase in fraud, right? The government's getting organized. You're starting to see a decline in fraud there. While India and Singapore are getting organized, they're still on the up ramp of fraud. Not every geography has the same tall bar on their Pareto. France is still very much focused on payment cards. Australia's focused on scams. UK, they're seeing a shift back from scams or authorized push payments back to payment card fraud, right? Again, they're not going to go get real jobs. But we need to watch this. We need to learn and we need to prepare. And that's actually where our gap is right now. We are repeating history. We're not preparing. So what are we seeing domestically? We continue to see somewhere, again, depending on who you ask, a 10 to 30% growth rate in scams. Why the range, right? Why don't you know? Because we don't have a central repository on reporting fraud attempts, fraud loss sums, victims, etc. So it's absolutely a need. We've always kind of done it by channel. We've done it by sector. We do not have a single holistic view of the problem. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of people are not sitting back just idly watching this happen. We simply lack a global acknowledgement of the program and an orchestrated effort to tackle it. FIs have their consortiums, all their partnerships, you can't tell me you can open your banking app or your email and not have something from your financial institution trying to educate you about scams and fraud. The telcos, right? Anti-phishing, anti-smishing efforts, they're not sitting back doing nothing. Law enforcement, right? Everything that HSI has done with the No Detect program around education, right? Knowledge is power. The tech sector, right? A lot of collaboration on best practices and actions needed. So no individual is sitting back and just letting this happen. What is separating us from these other geographies is we do not have an orchestrated effort around this. So let's talk quickly about what that might look like, right? Because I get asked a lot, hey, public sector, private sector. In my view right now, I will tell you, and again, learning from history, the benefits of being old, if you go back to that genesis of chip and pin and what became EMV standards that live on today for the payment card industry, it was both. It was an extremely complex collaboration in work plan between issuers, acquirers, card manufacturers, merchants, terminal manufacturers, payment card networks, payment card solution providers, service providers, consumers, regulators, the media to bring this to life. It can be done. It takes an orchestrated cross-sector effort to make it happen. I know what we're going through right now is more complex. Our lives are more complex. Our world's more complex. But we do know from history, it can be done if we pay attention to other geographies and we learn from this. I have to tell you right now, I don't necessarily see the light at the end of the tunnel here domestically. And we'll tell you, I largely, when I usually give this speech, I usually put Canada in the same boat because I think they, like the States, is lagging on this front. I do believe it's going to take a hybrid effect. I'm just not sure at this point what the genesis of that's going to be. So it is what it is, right? We're learning again. Bad guys operate globally. We're learning that we need to, at a minimum, have a global view of what's going on, understand their playbook, understanding how they're going to apply their playbook, and be prepared accordingly. So when I think about financial services, and I even think about law enforcement, I think about, okay, so what's coming here domestically? We're going to see the attack rate increase. We're going to see the sophistication, the sheer velocity of the attack rate in the States increase for all the reasons that I just articulated, this global squeezing of the balloon. Some of our tools and capabilities that we've relied on for many, many years are going to be rendered obsolete. The advent of AI means that things that we were using to detect voice or image before just are simply going to be rendered obsolete. So as an ecosystem, we're going to need to develop new tools and capabilities very quickly. This last one might be a little bit optimistic, but I hope that AI will become mainstream in the fight against AI. Right now, it's very difficult for a financial institution if you're in financial crimes risk management, given the regulatory constraints and expectations around model management. It is very difficult to effectively and rapidly and timely use machine learning and AI to fight machine learning and AI. We have got to solve for this. So this might be my most optimistic, but I believe that we're going to realize the unintended consequences of some of these regulatory burdens on this particular use case, and we're going to overcome this. So if you're sitting here as a financial institution, if you're sitting here as law enforcement, think about what's on the left and think about what you need to do. How high can your attack rate go before you no longer have the personnel to even begin to tackle this? What's your caseload per FTE? When do you know that you're just not going to be able to hire enough people, enough skilled labor to deal with this? What are the impacts on brand? What are the impacts on usage and adoption? Right? You should be studying this now. You should be reframing your risk tolerance and consequently your action plan. If you are not involved in collaboration, you sure as hell should be. Get yourself to a table. Talk to your peers, find out what they know, share practices. This is at the heart of the fight. The bad guys collaborate. We need to collaborate, and we need to do it more readily and more often. I've talked a lot today about watch and learn, right? History repeats itself. There is this geographical squeezing of the balloon. Watch and learn, have a broader perspective, be a student of the discipline. And then business case development. You're going to need new tools. You're going to need staff. Now begin to understand all those economic variables, begin to frame out your business cases and be ready to go because you're going to need it. So with that, Brooke, I am going to take a long swig of water and we can open it up for questions.